Today, we're going to take a look at the new 24-70 2.8 Art from Sigma. Let's jump right into this review, and it's really not a review, it's more of a first look. I get to spend the weekend with it and take some pics with it and just run around and do whatever I wanted to do with it. This lens comes in at $12.99 US, and it's about $600 cheaper than Canon's counterpart, the Canon 24-70 2.8 2 USM lens. So is this lens worth it to save your money, or is the Canon actually worth the extra $600 that you're paying? Let's jump right into the build quality. Now, this lens is extremely robust, and Sigma is known for this as far as their Art series of lenses. From the moment you pick this lens up, it feels like a professional lens in your hands, and that could be a good side or bad side depending on who you are. We'll get into that a little bit more as we go through this video, but this lens is a heifer. It is huge, it is big, it is bulky. It's really not that big as far as length goes, but when it comes to weight and size, it feels like a professional lens. It feels like something that you can trust to be, shaken around in your camera bag, and it feels like it can take a couple of hits. It's extremely well built. It's all metal and some really high quality plastic as well. And it's just all around a really beefy and nice solid lens. There are two different switches on this. There's the OS switch and the AF switch to MF switch. They're very high quality switches. When you change from MF to AF, it really feels like there's something going on inside the lens technically and optically. It's not cheap, it's not plasticky. It feels like you're actually switching from one setting to another. The focus ring and the zoom ring are very well built. They feel great in the hand. There's a lot of grip to them, and they turn very smoothly. The front element is 82 millimeters, and that probably means you're going to end up spending quite a bit of money on filters. Moving on to usability, this is a very heavy lens. Although it's very robust and it feels great in the hands and it feels professional, it's very heavy. And it's weird because it's heavier than some of the other lenses that I've been using as well, including the Tamron 70-200 2.8, which is a massive lens. I mean, this lens is almost half the size of the Tamron, and it's just as heavy, if not heavier. As far as its size goes, it doesn't seem like it would be all that heavy, but it really is. In fact, it's actually heavier than my 18-35 1.8, and my 18-35 1.8 is bigger as well. This is definitely something to keep in mind if you plan on adapting this lens to a Sony body or a small mirrorless camera. We'll get into that here in a minute, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. Now let's talk about the zoom ring. The zoom ring is very smooth and it works well. However, I noticed that when you zoom in, it's a little bit more stiff, but when you zoom out, it's definitely smoother. If you plan on using this lens for photography, you may not notice anything, but if you're a run and gun filmmaker, you may want to check that out. That may be something that could be a downside for you. Now take this with a grain of salt because it's really not that stiff. However, it is noticeable. Let's talk about the focus ring. The focus ring is very smooth, but it's a little bit small. While I was testing this lens, I did notice once or twice, a couple of times, that I missed the focus ring while trying to grab it. It's kind of small, but that shouldn't be a huge downside. Now, something worth mentioning is that the zoom and focus rings are opposite from what you're used to. The zoom ring is closest to the front element and the focus ring is closest to you. Most of Sigma's lenses don't work like this. Tamron's lenses do, and if you're not used to that, it can throw you off. If you're constantly changing lenses and one lens is different than the other, you might end up getting mixed up, and you don't want that. Also, the zoom ring zooms the same way Canon zooms. Moving on to the optical stabilization, it's good. Most lenses nowadays work similarly as far as optical stabilization goes. It works as expected. Nothing astronomical, nothing game-changing. It works how it's supposed to work. Now let's move into the different types of cameras that I tested this with. My primary camera with this lens was a 5D Mark IV, but I also tested it with the Sony a6500 and the MC11 adapter from Sigma. Shooting with the 5D Mark IV was pretty fun, honestly. I enjoyed it. It was easy to use. Ergonomically, it was fantastic, and it really didn't miss focus at all. It was quick and it hit focus. Bear in mind this lens is supposed to be used with Canon bodies. It's native to the Canon EF mount. Paired with the dual pixel AF from Canon, it worked out very well. However, and this may be crushing to most people that use Sony cameras and like to adapt glass, it wasn't that great on my a6500. Like I said earlier, this lens is very heavy, and Putting the 18 to 35 on my Sony for the first time was really scary, but I got used to it, and it seems like it's not too heavy. When I put the 24 to 70 on my A6500, it was too heavy. This lens makes your setup extremely front heavy, and you put it on a tripod and it just falls over. If you have a sturdy tripod, of course it's going to be okay, but this really has some give on it when it comes to putting it on the A6500. You don't want your lens to be too heavy and risk ripping the mount off of your camera. This portion of my review really bummed me out because I was planning on buying this lens and using it with my A6500. However, it just does not seem like this is the right lens for that kind of camera. The autofocus was actually awful. It was horrible on my A6500. Now, bear in mind, it's a brand new lens. So the MC11 might need to get updated from Sigma. My MC11 has the newest firmware update and it should be good to go, but the autofocus was absolutely atrocious. You can see right here that the touch to focus took 6, even 7 seconds to focus in video mode. It has a huge problem with hunting when it comes to photos as well. The autofocus on my 5D Mark IV was fantastic and it hit focus every single time on everybody's eye in low light. No matter what, it hit focus. It was fantastic. Now, Sigma is notorious for having lenses that are brand new that have issues with front and back focusing and whatever, and that really kills some of their lenses because you have to buy their adapter to your computer, and then you have to update the firmware, and you have to make the micro adjustments on your computer. Now, I didn't bother doing that, so yes, I did miss focus a couple of times with the 5D Mark IV. However, it did not hunt. It only missed focus because I didn't calibrate it properly. My A6500 actually had hunting problems and completely ridiculous speed problems. I mean, it took 6 or 7 seconds for it to focus on a different subject. I don't know what the problem was. Maybe Sigma needs to update their adapter. I'm not sure. But as for right now, this lens is no good on the A6500. It's too heavy and the autofocus just isn't really that great. You might want to wait it out and see if the updates come out. It doesn't take away from the fact that this is a heavy lens and it's going to be difficult to use on a small body camera. Now, what most of you have been waiting for is to hear about the image quality because Sigma's known for their sharp lenses in their art line. Their art series is fantastic when it comes to image quality and everyone knows it. That's why most people are willing to give up the ergonomics and the usability just for the image quality and the price. This lens, as expected, is very, very sharp, even wide open. I shot the majority of my photos at 2.8 and any time that I actually hit focus, it was outstandingly sharp. I didn't add any sharpness to any of these photos that I'm showing you right now. And these things are just incredibly sharp. The glass that's in these lenses is just absolutely fantastic. I noticed almost no chromatic aberration and only really on harsh edges, and it was just a bit of purple fringing. In the corners, of course, you're gonna get some chromatic aberration if something's out of focus. That's just natural. The bokeh on this lens is so creamy, it's so buttery, it's so nice. And that probably comes with the fact that they're using such high quality glass. These lenses are just incredibly well built, and Sigma is really doing a lot when it comes to image quality and sharpness and bokeh. I can't think of another series of lenses that's sharper. All right, we're coming to the end now. Who is this lens for? As of right now, I have to say, not Sony users. This would have been a huge disappointment to me had Tamron not announced their own version of this lens in their second generation. That lens is also highly anticipated, and I'm probably gonna wanna get my hands on that as well. Adapting this lens to Sony bodies is probably not a good idea right now. It has bad autofocus and it's just too heavy. This lens is for, honestly, I don't think anyone yet. The fact that Tamron's 24 to 70 2.8 is also coming out within probably a month or so means I don't think this lens should be bought by anyone. If anything, you should be renting this lens and seeing if you like it. However, you should wait for Tamron to come out with their lens before you pick this thing up. We don't know how good Tamron's gonna be. It's also $100 cheaper. So if it's just as good, if not better than this lens, you might just want to pick up the Tamron. If you plan on getting a 24 to 70 2.8 for your small form factor camera, you probably want to wait for the Tamron because it's going to be lighter. It's not as bulky. It's not an art series lens. Sigma's art series lenses are just, they're exclusively heavy and big and bulky. You might want to wait for the Tamron to come out and see how you like that one instead. Okay, so what happens if Tamron doesn't live up to its expectations? This lens is still not for the A6500 or any of the small body cameras. This lens is for native Canon shooters, Nikon shooters, Sigma shooters. You're gonna wanna go native with this lens. If you're looking for a lens for $600 less than the Canon 24 to 70 2.8 II, this might be the lens for you if you're shooting on Canon. The image quality is probably just as good, if not better, as far as sharpness goes and chromatic aberration. The usability is not quite the same. It's a little bit heavier, a little bit more rugged, and the zoom and the focus ring are opposites and stuff like that. However, I don't think the usability of this lens is so far behind Canon that it's not worth buying. To save $600, you might want to pick up this lens. So overall, where do I stand with this lens? Well, I used it on the 5D Mark IV and it was very fun to use. It really was. It was a good lens. It was fun to use. It was fun to go out and shoot with. It was good for landscapes. It was good for portraits. That's kind of what this lens is all about. It's nice for wide. It's nice for medium telephoto. And it's just all around a run and gun lens. Where I stand with this lens is probably a solid 7.5 or 8. 7.5 or 8 out of 10. That's what I'll give it. It's a really, really great lens. And for the price, I think it's worth it to take this over the Canon if you're shooting on a Canon body. All right, so that's the review of the Sigma 24-70 2.8 Art Series lens, and I am so glad that you guys stuck around to listen to me babble on about it. If you have any issues with what I said, you can hit me down in the comments and tell me why I'm wrong. But that's it for this one, so I'll see you guys in the next video.